Good afternoon, everyone. It is 5 o'clock, and I'm going to call this meeting to order and begin by asking Councillor Greenfield to read our land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Your Worship, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We would like to begin by acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional lands and treaty territory of the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, which includes the Chippewas of Nawash, unceded First Nation, and the Chippewas of Saugeen First Nation. We also recognize the Métis, whose ancestors shared this land and these waters. We extend our gratitude to all Anishinaabe and Métis peoples and their descendants, past, present, and future, who continue to care for and inhabit these lands and tend to these waters.
Thank you. And now I'll just ask you to join me in a moment of silent reflection on today's business. Thank you very much. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, just a reminder that you can bring it forward if it should occur to you. And at this point, I'm just welcome everyone. It's nice to see a full council chamber, and you're doing what you ought to do as a ratepayer, and we're glad to see you. This meeting is to learn about proposals to amend the land use planning permissions applying to certain lands in the municipality of Meaford. It's very important to note that the Planning Act requires that a person who may later wish to file an appeal to council's decision on any of these matters must either provide verbal comments today at this public meeting or provide written comments to council before the amendments are passed. The intention of this requirement is that only those people who have taken the time and care to learn about the proposal and to engage in the planning process may have an opportunity to appeal a decision to the Ontario Land Tribunal. Council is legally required to make decisions that conform to the county and local official plans. Our policies encourage us to reach out to community stakeholders to gather information. We have a variety of legal tools available to us that we can apply to development to help us manage change in a positive manner with as minimal an impact as possible, and your insights can be part of what informs our direction. Those in attendance for today's meetings will have an opportunity to speak in person or remotely if pre-registered through Zoom. This meeting is not structured as a dialogue between speakers and the applicant. However, the applicant may take the opportunity to respond to comments toward the end of the meeting if they wish. Note that in many cases, formulating responses may require that staff carry out research after the meeting on the matters raised and provide answers following the meeting or through their report to council. And I'll now call today's first public meeting to order. There are two of them today. This is a public meeting to consider a zoning bylaw amendment for updates to provisions on additional residential units in the municipality of Meaford's zoning bylaw 60/2009. This meeting is a mandatory part of the planning process, which has been set out by the Planning Act. Based on the rules of the Act, there must be at least 20 days notice given to residents within 120 meters. I think I'm on the wrong page. Sorry about that. No, that is the second part. It's complicated. It's very important to note that the Planning Act requires a person who may later wish to file an appeal to council's decision on any of these matters must either provide verbal comments today at this public meeting or provide written comments to council before the amendments are passed. The intention of this requirement is that only those who have taken the time and care to learn about the proposal and to engage in the planning process may have an opportunity to appeal a decision to the Land Tribunal. So council is legally required to make decisions, and I think I've covered that paragraph as well. Sorry. Those in attendance for today's meetings will have the opportunity to speak in person or remotely. The meeting is not structured as a dialogue between speakers and the applicant. However, the applicant may take the opportunity to respond to comments toward the end of the meeting if they wish. Note that in many, yes, okay. So I'm calling today's first public meeting to order, and this is a public meeting to consider zoning bylaw amendments for updates to provisions on additional residential units in the municipality of Meaford zoning bylaw. This meeting is a mandatory part of the planning process, which has been set out by the Planning Act. Based on the rules of the Act, there must be, sorry, I'm confused. This is a script that I haven't had a lot of opportunity to, so I'm want to open the first part of the meeting, and we've done. Okay, thank you. Notice of the zoning bylaw amendment was issued in 2 local newspapers on February 8th and February 10th, giving more than the required 20 days of notice. So first of all, and thank you very much, Meredith, I'll ask Denise McCarl, Manager of Planning Services, to give us a presentation about the proposed zoning update and to provide us with any public and agency comments that have been received to date. Denise?
Thank you, Your Worship. So I wanted to make a landed joke here about how so many people were here to be for my public meeting, but I wasn't going to be able to deliver it without snickering ahead of time. We know everyone's not here for my public meeting, but I am excited that people are going to have to hear it because they're stuck with me for the next few minutes. Because we haven't had as much interest in this particular proposal as we were hoping. We thought we'd be getting all these letters saying, Denise, you're doing a great job. Thanks for doing this, but I haven't. But I am very happy to be here today. So thank you so much to those who have been working with me behind the scenes and have provided comments to me, even though they haven't submitted letters to me. I have had a few people who've just given me some unofficial letters as well. So back in November, we had a meeting to talk about how I was bringing this forward. I brought an information report to council, and I'd hoped it would be a little sooner than now, but we are here today, which is great. This is the mandatory public meeting for this particular proposal. So we will be posting some drafts following this meeting based on what we get from today. So the kinds of information we get from today. The purpose of this meeting is for me to hear me talk for a little while about what we're thinking about doing. It's also an ability for the public to speak to us about what they believe is whether they agree with the proposal or not and what they like about it. And I have a few of those comments. And it also satisfies the requirements for holding a public meeting under the Planning Act. So as you know, I think council is pretty aware that the Planning Act changed in 2023 that requires us to make some changes to our zoning bylaw. And if we don't make those changes, the Planning Act does trump some of that. It overrides those rules if we haven't made those changes. So we did make some updates to our official plan, knowing that those changes came forward. So we're in good position that we have the policy updates done, and now we're here to bring those changes forward. The original legislation to allow additional residential units isn't new, and it came forward through Bill 140 in 2011. So following that, many municipalities went away and started making updates to zoning bylaws and official plan amendments and stuff like that for policies, and puts the wheels in motion to allow additional residential units on most types of properties. Unfortunately, we haven't had as many people install these units as we wish they would. So we wanted to believe that we would put these policies in place, the provisions would be put in place, and then everyone's putting in a unit in their home. And that has not happened. Maybe not everyone, but lots of people. And unfortunately, we've only done a couple of dozen in the municipality since the provisions were changed. And the majority of those are on rural properties, Very few are on urban properties where obviously if you put a unit in and people can now, if they're in the urban area, they don't even need a car and they might be able to walk to their job, walk to get groceries and all of that. So the ability for affordable housing, there, I mean, it's a great opportunity, but one that we have not seen realized. So currently we allow units in to every house that is either a single detached, a semi-detached, or a townhouse that is in the typical zone, so the residential zones, or in the rural area on an agricultural property, et cetera. We allow those folks to put in an additional unit already. And now we have to allow a third unit. So that's the thing that we're being made to do by the province. And we really, as planners, want to do it. But what we're also doing today is considering other things that our regulations may restrict, that would make it hard to install these units, that we might be able to loosen or maybe be more friendly to people putting these units in based on the feedback we've received, actual feedback over the years. And I can tell you, we've done a number of minor variances in the 2 years that I've been here for these units because of the fact that our restrictions are there. Now, this is probably the most important slide. Oops, maybe it's not. Hold on, I must have missed one. Here we go. Next slide will be the one. So what are ADUs, ARUs? What are additional residential units? I think most people sort of know what they are. They're self-contained dwellings. So we called them accessory apartments in our zoning bylaw, but they are, by all intents and purposes, a residential unit in and of itself. They can be rented out. They can be used for family members. They have a kitchen and they have a bathroom. So they qualify as a home. Often they're basement apartments. That's certainly one of the most popular options. They could be an apartment above a garage, and they could be in an attic that's not finished now, and it could be finished to allow for that. They can also be in an attached building. So we've talked about what kinds, in the notice I talked about what do we call that? We've often called those, we've called them, before it comes up, we've called them tiny homes. We've called them laneway houses or garden suites. Garden suites are considered something a little bit different normally because those are temporary homes, usually on rural properties. But I've noticed when doing research out there in the world, what are builders calling them? What are other municipalities calling them? And some of them are calling them garden suites. And I think that's to reflect the fact that they are often in a backyard. Granny flats, etc. Tiny homes are already permitted through the existing program that we have, our policies and our zoning provisions. The only zone that would not allow a tiny home would be our country residential zone. And the province has the restrictions and all of that on tiny homes through the Ontario Building Code, and they can go quite small now. I think they're down to 188 square feet, so pretty tiny, or 17 and a half square meters. Our zoning bylaw doesn't restrict the size otherwise, so it's just whatever you can build under the Ontario Building Code. All right, so here we are. This is the slide. I just wanted to draw your attention to a correction on it. But generally the above list, what it's meant to, or the list is meant to show, is what can you have. So what you can have up to, Bill 23 allows up to 3 units per property on urban residential serviced parcels of land. And it should say 3 units with no detached units, so 3 units in a main building. So you could, by all intents and purposes, build a triplex or change your house into a triplex unit, even if you have a townhouse. And that is something the province has mandated, so we have to do. You can have 2 units in a main building and 1 detached unit. And that last slide should just say, it's just it was actually to be point to the one below it. So you can't have 2 detached units, but you can have up to 3 units, 2 in the main building and 1 detached, and 3 units in a main building. So And you can also in places where you can still have one attached and one main unit, one detached unit. So you can still just have two if you want. But we are being forced to take the third unit. However, today we were mostly considering this in the urban residential parcels of land. So we're not considering adding a third unit to rural properties today, but it is something that I will talk to or speak to later that we are going to look into further in the overall zoning update that council should be aware of. We're going to be doing in 2024. So we'll be doing a major zoning overhaul to enact some of the things that have come down through the county and the Meaford official plan. So let's look at some examples of ARUs. I'm using ARUs when I'm and ADUs. They're both used pretty interchangeably around the province. Our official plan, though, calls them additional residential units. So I'm kind of playing with the ARU as our standard, just because it makes sense with the nomenclature that we have. I think most people have seen these kind of units online or even built around town or other towns or in the rural area. There's a couple of units in there you might notice have 2 stories. And that's something that we want to talk about today. So if you have a detached unit currently, if you want to build a detached unit, it has to be 1 story maximum and a maximum of 4.5 meters high. And that 4.5 meters high is really what stops you from being able to build a second floor. And the question is, do we want that? Is that something that makes a lot of sense? And especially in the rural area where a unit above a garage probably would have no impact to anybody. It's something that we want council to think about and the public to think about. You know, if we want to have these units, we're probably going to have to be more flexible and loosen up some of the standards that we put in place previously. Right now, so that 4.5 meter high, that is the current urban restriction, not so much rural, but the urban restriction, that pretty much stops you from ever having an upstairs in a building. In the rural area, we have 5.5 meters. Some people have been able to make that work as a 1.5 story with some creativity, but it's not easy. So I think that's really one of the main questions that we want to get to over the next little while as we start drafting the zoning update. Here's some examples from the provincial page for second residential units, which is out of date now, but it just shows you some pictorial like image that you can see, okay, how could these go and be put in? The province hasn't updated their own kind of how-to guide since they made these changes, but I do expect that they will, since they've put quite a lot of effort into that guide. They also have a guide on tiny homes that they've put quite a lot of effort into. So I suspect that they're going to be making some changes just to update that. So this image here, the one on the left, shows 2 similar size units. And I just want to note that right now that isn't permitted by the current zoning rules we have. And that's because currently the main unit has to be, say, 100% of the size. So if it's think about it as this way, if you have, the best example I have is a bungalow. So if you have 1,000 square foot bungalow, the second unit you put in, say you put a basement apartment in, can't be any bigger than 500 square feet or half the size. So that leaves people with some part of their property that they're not utilizing fully. And my question would be, do we care if they have 2 equal size apartments, and why does that matter? The second picture on the right-hand side kind of shows a different example of how it would be divided up, being that the upstairs is a little bit smaller. Just to continue on with my thievery, I stole this picture from, I think, Port Hope. But I did did attribute it to them. So it's not a full theft, but I will say that it had some great images to just show you how these units can be arranged. And I think the bottom left-hand side is the maximum that we would be able to look at. So it's showing kind of 3 units there. It's got a primary residential unit as the little blue part. And then below it has the basement or the first story or whatever that is showing as the second residential unit. I guess it does say basement apartment now that I look at it. And then beside that, looks like maybe a garage or that sort of size is the 3rd unit. And that's pretty much what we've mostly seen municipalities doing. One of the questions I would have is, are we okay with maybe allowing for that detached unit to be a little taller? Do we care if it's 1.5 stories? Can it be 2 stories? Should it stay at 1 story? And I think that's because we're noticing that in the urban area where we really want people to put these units in, people's backyards are, to maximize that space, we really need to be more creative. So if they want to put in a small unit and make it a 2-story unit or 1.5 story, they'll probably be able to get a reasonable sized home in there that would work for a lot of people. And we're seeing just as in case you're wondering, most people who are asking to put these in are doing it for family members. Not that they're required to, but that are the people that are interested in doing it. And that's because of the amount of cost involved in putting one of these units in. I think everyone in council is well aware that the cost of construction has gone way up. And so putting one of these units in, what we're hearing quotes for, a lot of people are telling me that it's costing between $250,000 to $300,000 to put a backyard suite on their property. So that is not really affordable housing, and it's not really going to work for a lot of people. So we're working with the program we have to figure out ways to make that work better for people. So if they can build up a little bit or be able to not have a restriction on the size within the main building, they can just add, as the middle one there on the top shows, an addition at the back of their property. It doesn't have to be a basement apartment or an attic space. It can be an addition to one side or the back or something like that to add one of these units. So some of the changes we need to make for the zoning update are just to make it work better for everybody. We've noticed we've had some struggles with the naming of some of the definitions and some of the other things that we have that make it hard for us to interpret or the public to interpret what they're allowed to do. So one of the things we're going to do is change the current name of these types of units from accessory apartment dwelling unit to additional residential unit to be more in line with provincial changes. We're going to we have to allow up to the 3 units on urban service land. We're proposing removing completely the restriction that limits them to 2 bedrooms. We've had a lot of folks this will speak to them. I'll actually park that for a moment and just read the next one. So increase the maximum size to up to 90% of the main unit, mainly for the detached unit, not so much for the one if it's inside the existing house, if you're just dividing it. And clarify that additional residential units are separate unit types from an accessory apartment to a commercial use. That's because they basically have the same name, but they're quite different. So we've got accessory apartments and apartment units in the, say, for example, the C1 zone, the downtown commercial zone, or the C3 zone. And we want to make sure that those are treated differently because legislation is different for those. Many downtown buildings can have many units in them above the stores that are there. And so they're not limited to 1, 2, or 3 units. So I think what's important about some of these changes is one of the scenarios we get asked often, and I think it's a great idea and certainly allowed everywhere else, is that folks have an existing house. And if you imagine this, it happens a lot with the rural area where you have an old farmhouse, maybe it's 1,200 square feet, and someone buys that property and would like to build a bigger house. The way that our program is set up now, folks are being told that they can't build a bigger house because the accessory apartment unit has to be built secondary. we'd like to make sure that that is removed so that it doesn't really matter the order that they're built, as long as the ultimate build out is that there's a main unit and then the additional dwelling unit. So if someone wants to build a bigger home, we're not asking them to tear down the existing home to do that necessarily. And certainly that will allow us to keep many homes that are currently, and I think we've had maybe 6 to 10 of these in the last year being proposed, and we've basically told people no. I don't think that that is the goal that we want to set, that we want to allow people to keep homes that exist and just build something else, if that makes sense to their property. So as I've noted, we were talking about potentially going up to 2 stories in height for the additional residential unit. And this would be for the detached unit, because the main unit is already allowed to be whatever it says in that zone. So if you're in a residential multiple zone and you're allowed a townhouse, you can have a 3-story townhouse if that's what the zone says. This would be for the detached unit. And you would be able to add on to your building if you just wanted to make an addition, and it would just need to meet the parent zoning requirements. So the height, though, is really important to a lot of people. I think over the last few years, I've been working with these, even in other municipalities, it comes up the most, and it's the one we do minor variances on the most. And of course, if we're doing multiple minor variances for the exact same thing, we probably have a zoning problem we want to correct. Because there's no point in just saying yes to someone after they go through a process if we knew we were going to say yes all along. That's certainly not what we want to do. And I think, as I've noted, we want to clarify that a property owner with an existing small dwelling can still build a bigger dwelling at a later time, as long as it meets the requirements at the end. So when they've built out, it still meets the zoning bylaw. And this is pretty common among other jurisdictions. When I did my research, it's the way that they're reading they're interpreting their zoning as well. So other places I've worked as well, or folks that I've asked in our neighboring municipalities, have faced these same questions and are allowing for that type of unit, a type of build out. And what can't we do? So we can't require folks to put in more than 1 parking space per unit, and the province has set that already. And that 1 parking space would only be required if we require parking for the original house. Some places, not here, but some places don't require parking because they're in transit corridors. But if we require parking, we can't require more than 1 extra space for those additional units. And we are not allowed to require people to have already built a main house first. If someone wants to purpose build these units, they can. So they can start with a vacant parcel, and the province has determined that it doesn't matter if they don't have a unit there now. So you don't have to have, I mean, in the old days, I remember a few of these where we were allowing the additional unit as long as you'd already had a house. So you had to have a house for a certain number of years, and you could build another unit. The province has said that's not okay. And if someone wants to purpose build, basically a duplex or triplex type development on a property, we have to accept it as part of this type of program. And then, of course, there's no minimum size allowed under zoning. So it falls under the building code. So that was added a couple of years ago to the regulations of the Planning Act. And so we're just going to make sure that our stuff aligns correctly with that. So in our process, we're calling this an application. It's municipal-led application. So we're processing the same as we do with almost everything. This is the public meeting. So we've put out public notice in the newspapers. I've had some feedback from folks already. And at this point, we will go away with whatever information we receive today from folks who do provide some comments, and we will make recommendations to council in a future staff report. We're aiming for later this month to come back very quickly, and then council will have the ability to make a decision. Council's decision to allow a 3rd unit is not appealable, so it's not subject to an OLT appeal because it's already been determined that it's required. So I'm just mentioning that part. So if anyone wants to, who's listening at home or here today on, and they actually did come to my meeting, please feel free to, if you haven't already written a comment down and you want to do that, please just send us an email to planning@meaford.ca, and we will incorporate that into a follow-up staff report for council. And that's all I have right now. I'm going to go back to, I closed my computer, your worship. So now I have to open it up to get to the comments that we have received. We've only received 2 comments, one from the County of Grey and one from one resident. I'm sure there are other folks that probably will provide a couple of comments. I think most people that I've heard from want this, and so they've been waiting for it. And so maybe that's why they haven't commented, because they just assume it's going forward. Rather than people who don't want it. So, but if you give me a moment, I'll open up my computer and then
By
give
all
you my
means.
summary for that.
And thank you very much for the presentation. I think
Sorry about that, your worship
No,
and
no problem.
council. 18 clicks to open the file I wanted. Anyways, so the county was very supportive. I've sent you a copy in its entirety of their letter. It was actually very lengthy. And they noted that generally speaking, their policies already enable this, where that was done through a previous update. And they've just noted some things like, for example, that ARUs are subject to minimum distance separation. So if it is another residential unit in proximity to a livestock operation, it's still subject to that setback requirement. And they've talked about in their comments that where ARUs are on smaller parcels under 0.4 hectares in size, we might want to consider requiring a nitrate study. They also noted that they had done a partnership with the University of Guelph students, and they came up with an ARU and zoning, a policy and zoning template that we could use as a resource, which I've taken a look at. And I also forwarded that, I downloaded that and forwarded it to you, council, so that you would have that at your disposal as well. We had one comment from Adrian and Becky Holvik, which was generally supportive of the updates. They've noted that the change of naming from accessory apartment to additional residential unit is a positive change. They've noted they want to build basically like what we've talked about earlier, or what I mentioned earlier. They have a smaller home and they'd like to build a bigger home and retain the smaller home. And so they support that particular change. Because they had been previously told that they don't meet the zoning bylaw for that conversion. And I think that's generally the gist of what they've explained. I mean, they have a few explanations of why they want these changes. They noted that increasing the height would be beneficial, as well as increasing the number of bedrooms. And they're suggesting, because in the notice originally it said up to 3 bedrooms, and they're suggesting we just remove the restriction on bedrooms completely. they support the increase in ratio between the main unit and the additional residential units. And any other changes to things like setbacks. And we've also talked about, which I didn't mention in the presentation, but changing the setback in a rural area potentially. Right now, we require them to be within the building cluster. And we still will. However, we've defined that building cluster as 50 meters from the main dwelling. And that's so that rural properties don't stick a unit out in the back 40 and have to put a whole nother septic in and potentially affect farmland. We're not probably going to make any changes to that at this particular juncture, but in the overall update for the zoning bylaw, we may actually make some changes in that regard that would conform with the official plan policies. And that's the limits of the comments we have so far.
Okay, thank you very much. There have been no other pre-registrations to speak in person at this meeting by members of the public. Is there anyone present who does wish to speak who did not pre-register on the topic that we've just been presented on? If anyone wishes to speak to it, do you have this opportunity? Yes. Would you come up and give us your name and we need your mic turned on there. So, there.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. So I'm Adrian Holvik, and Denise did caption my comments quite well. I appreciate you guys looking at this issue and making the effort to come in line with the policy. I think the height issue, or like reducing the height issue or trying to mitigate that as like a restriction is good, because in my case, I had an existing dwelling and want to build another dwelling, and I just find it completely wasteful to have to tear down my existing dwelling. And probably a lot of people are in my same situation, and you can't control what they built in the past. So you can't control the height of the existing smaller dwelling before you get started. And I think that was the only thing I wanted to add to what Denise said.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? If not, I'm going to ask members of council if they have any input at this point on the presentation. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Denise, for a very informative presentation. I did have a question. Some other communities offer incentives to encourage people to add additional residential units to their properties, and I'm just wondering if we have any in our arsenal, or is this something we could look at as we go through discussions about revising our CIP?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So that is a great question. You're absolutely right. Some municipalities, our neighbors, for example, have a fairly hefty grant program through, I believe, Town of Collingwood with the County of Simcoe together, has a pretty good grant program. The issue with that is that folks do have to keep those units as affordable for a period of time, and they have to enter into an agreement, which I think is wonderful. And it's certainly, there is some uptake into that program. It's something, I mean, I think we would love to have, and whether or not we have the ability to move that direction, I'm not sure. Through the CIP, there may be the ability to have grants for some of the smaller things like building permit fees and things like that, have a rebate on that. But in terms of that more substantial grant program, it's not something I'm aware of at this time, but I'm happy to go back and look at do some further research into what are our opportunities there. And something that we have talked about when we've talked about affordable housing strategies with the county in brief, but at this point, we don't have anything but similar to what the County of Simcoe has.
Councillor Uhrig.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Relevant to Mr. Holbeck's comment, are there any grandfathering contingencies in place through governmental mechanisms that kind of address that scenario where somebody has an existing abode already on their property and they just want to do some tweaking to it.
So I might need some clarification through you, Mr. Chair. If somebody has a pre-existing dwelling and they want to build a new dwelling right now if they want to build they can build an ADU. So it doesn't matter how high their existing house is, or if it doesn't meet other requirements, if they are allowed to build an ADU. However, I think in this case, because their ADU would change and become the existing dwelling and the new main dwelling is the bigger one, that's where we got kind of hung up. And so I think by just tweaking some of the language in our zoning definitions and things like that, we will be addressing that. I don't know if that answers the question really, but right now we call them accessory we call them accessory apartment dwelling units. And so we've applied all the accessory building provisions that we normally have to these, which meant that you couldn't build. I think where we got hung up is you can't build an accessory building before a main building. So you can't build a garage and then build your house. You have to build the main building first, and that's where it got hung up. I'm not sure if that correctly answers you, Councillor Urick, but maybe a clarifying point.
Yes and no, it does to a point because you're right. It stipulates the order. My question would be more in the lines of if we are starting to getting into things like altering heights, whether or not, and again, is somebody going to spend a lot of money to alter something from 4 meters to 5.5 might be cost prohibitive, but and if it's an existing building, are there grandfathering? Have they even considered that in governmental policy, whether grandfathering is part of the process of looking at existing structures? Because again, circumstances are going to change from case to case based on what's already existing. So I just don't know whether the government's looked into that possibility.
Your worship. So I am not aware of the province having tried to address this through grandfathering. I am aware that some municipalities have taken the stance that if it already pre-existed, that you can change the order of which one is the main unit and accessory unit automatically, just like almost like a change of use. So it hasn't become an issue. In terms of how other municipalities are dealing with this, where it has significant height, including above a garage or a garage that already exists with a second story, but maybe doesn't conform to the provisions now, they have put in caveats. So other municipalities have put in some, I don't want to say grandfathering, but have put in some provisions to recognize existing buildings as part of this. So instead of just permitting a 2-story accessory building or accessory unit or additional residential unit as of right, they might allow it if it already is that height. So, or if the garage is already that height, you can put the dwelling in it. So those sorts of things have come up in many municipalities that I researched.
Councillor Greenfield.
Thanks, Mayor Kentner, and thank you, Ms. McCarl. I'm wondering about ARUs. It says on slide 3 that they are permanent homes. Now, if you have three ARUs in one building, I guess I'm bound to look at this from this side of the table. Is there a specific tax, municipal tax assessment on these buildings? How does that play out? I mean, or you could have a detached building that you and your family live in plus 2 units. And I think somewhere in here it says, and again, this is an exception, that you could, it could be 90% of the square footage. Like, is there an effect on your municipal tax rate? How does that work?
So through you, Mr. Chair. So yes, you will affect your property probably through valuation of your property, just like all building permits probably do. So if you've increased the value of your property by adding a unit, you may be, and that's more of an impact question about how they've seen this change property valuation. I don't have the specifics, but it would be similar to when you do a renovation and redo your entire kitchen or something like that. Those things are based on the increase in value through that building permit. So if you've got a garage that you want to convert into an ARU, that is probably going to increase the value of the property and probably change your taxation of the property.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Your Worship, for allowing me a second question. Denise, as we talk about the ARUs and we understand that someone can have 3, and my mind goes to the opportunity to add an Airbnb or a short-term rental. Is that permitted within the provincial guidelines? Is that something that we need to address in our own zoning bylaw? Do we want to encourage or discourage the opportunity, as I suggest, to create short-term rentals? I mean, could all 3 units, for example, become Airbnbs or short-term rentals?
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is a great question. So currently detached residential units. What we've got is the detached accessory residential apartment currently is not permitted to be a short-term rental. Because as you know, we have that cottage rental provision and that has to be a single detached dwelling. So if you don't qualify as that type of unit, then you wouldn't be able to have a cottage rental. That's as it is today. So I'm not sure what might happen the next little while with some of the changes. But right now, ARUs would only be able to be part of the rental if it was in a main dwelling. That was my understanding. So people can't build one out back in a tiny home or something like that and have it as a rental at this time.
Councillor Bartley and then Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mayor Kettner. Thank you, Denise. Does the provincial policy include rule changes? And if so, why aren't we at this time?
Thanks for the question. Through you, Mr. Chair. So they don't, but we have gone ahead of the game. And so we are in a good position to include them. It's just that that's something that will take a little bit more effort because of the things that even that what I brought up through the county's comments. So our official plan did update to allow 3 units, so 2 ARUs in rural properties or agriculture, special agriculture and rural properties. The county has done so in their official plan. We've had our official plan. However, because some folks do have some circumstances that we do want to look into a little bit more, such as folks that have very small properties. Adding a 3rd unit is something that I think we may have to put some more parameters around. So it is something that we'll look at in the next year when we do the new zoning. It's probably going to be a brand new zoning bylaw, but a substantial zoning update. We will add in some additional stuff to whether or not we're going to allow the 3rd unit as of right. We haven't had anyone ask us about that yet, but it is permitted by our policy. So our OP does permit the 3 units in the rural area.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Denise. It's nice to have an upgrade to this important subject. And I realize that each application will be looked at literally case by case application. One of the things that I have heard about what happens in the rural community is that when there needs to be more persons living in the residence, septic is looked at virtually immediately. So what my hope is that if someone from a rural community comes in and wants to do this, that they are made aware that the implications of their septic system probably will parallel what they're doing. I think, and you will know this from what we've got from reports, putting in septic systems, they will likely have to do an upgrade from this councillor's position. If you could just speak to the awareness that they are given when they have this nice idea about putting up another little spot.
Thank you for the question. Through you, Mr. Chair. So I think it's one of the first things that, at least through my observation of listening in on conversations at the counter, that I hear people getting feedback on. So when they come to the counter and ask those questions, it's one of the things that comes up quite a lot, because it's certainly something that's also important with anytime you're adding bedrooms, this could come up because that's additional users of the septic system. So one of the things we've heard is that in some cases, folks have just installed a separate septic system for the additional unit. In other cases, perhaps they've made an upgrade, especially if it's within the house. So if you're dividing your house into 2 units inside the house, maybe you don't do that, and just make sure that your septic will handle it. But it is based on the number of users through bedrooms and things. So my answer to that would be, it is always flagged right away. I've heard a lot of conversations about the septic requirements come up through those reviews and even through that initial consultation at the counter or phone calls with the public.
Councillor Yurick, another question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Piggybacking on the septic, but let's go into the urban environment where it's services. So are these additional units at the back counting against our capacity and our wastewater? There's one service coming in now. How is that being fed to, and is it being viewed as a separate billing and as a separate service for that unit? If it is, that's going to affect our capacity overall.
Thank you for the question. Through you, Mr. Chair. So we want to believe that so many people will hit them in that it will make a big difference, but it won't, probably, because people aren't rushing, beating down the door to put these units in, unfortunately. But it does affect our sewage capacity. Normally, the way those units are being treated is they connect to the existing connection. However, it will cause, if there's additional people, it will cause flow change. We don't know the impact of these right off the top of what will happen, because we're kind of going by historical numbers. We have about 7 units probably connected to services in Meaford, the town, on sewer now that were added. So it's not a lot. So I think what we've looked at is it's not likely to make a huge difference right now because of the numbers that we're looking at, especially when we're seeing proposals for much larger projects. But it is something that is being considered as we plan our sewage treatment plant update and expansions. And it is something that we're kind of following to see how it changes the flow. I don't think it's something that we're expecting will make a huge difference in the next few years, because the uptake won't be hundreds and hundreds of these, but it definitely will make a difference eventually.
No other questions? Do you have any points raised that you just wanted to respond to at all today, Denise?
Thank you for that, Mr. Chair. Not really. I just wanted to remind people that so we do have a zoning page for this proposal. So on the zoning, I think it's called www.meaford.ca/zoning updates. And there's a page that we will also be using, that same page, for the bigger zoning update. And I don't think anyone's subscribed to it now, but if anyone wanted to, they would be given automatic updates about what's next. Otherwise, I'll just let folks know who have been contacting me, because I do expect to bring this forward fairly quickly. I have to consult internally on the drafts to make sure it works with building services and bylaw and all that. And then I'll be bringing back to this council very soon a draft with a report.
Thank you. So I want to thank everyone for your forbearance on this, what is a very, very important report for this council. This matter will now be referred back to Development Services staff to review any matters that were raised today. And once staff are satisfied that they have all necessary information needed to provide recommendations about the proposed zoning updates, a future detailed planning report will be brought back to a future council meeting to assist us in our decision-making. This report will include an analysis of the various public and agency comments received regarding the application, noting those tools which may be applied in order to address concerns raised, and to mitigate potential impacts on nearby properties. If you would like to receive notice of a future decision on this file, please provide your contact information to the Planning Services Division by email. The address is planning@meaford.ca. And now I'll call today's second public meeting to order. This is a public meeting to consider a zoning bylaw amendment for lands known as 412 Miller Street in Meaford. This meeting is a mandatory part of the planning process, which has been set out by the Planning Act. Based on the rules in the Act, there must be at least 20 days' notice given to residents within 120 meters of the property. Notice of the zoning bylaw amendment was issued on February 9th, 2024, and on February 13th, 2024, giving more than the required 20 days' notice. First, I'm going to invite Meredith Gillespie, planner, to give us a brief presentation about this application and to provide us with any public and agency comments that have been received to date. Meredith?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. So I'm going to get right into the presentation, and then I'm going to summarize the comments received. So as we know, it's a planning application for a multi-residential development at 412 Miller Street. And so the two files that are part of this proposal are the County of Grey Draft Plan of Condominium Application 42T 2024-01 and the Municipality Meaford file, which is the zoning bylaw amendment file Z01-2024. Just realized my clicker is over there. There we go. So just as the public meeting that we just were part of, the purpose of this public meeting is very similar. You're going to hear a brief presentation from myself with details about the subject lands and the application at hand, applications. And also, it will be an opportunity for the applicant to give a presentation with more details about the proposal. And finally, it's a forum to hear from the public, to comment and hear your thoughts on this proposal. So, the applicant is seeking to build multi-residential housing on the property at 412 Miller Street. The proposed rezoning seeks to rezone the lands from development, so the D zone, and environmental protection, or EP, to the following zones. So residential 2, so R2, residential 3, R3, residential multiple, RM, and open space, OS. So for a little bit more information about each of those, we have this slide. So the R2 zone would permit the semi-detached dwellings that are part of the proposal. The R3 zone would permit the single detached dwellings. The RM zone would permit the townhouse and multiple unit dwellings. And an exception has also been requested from the applicant to be added to all of these zones in order to limit the uses to only the ones that have been listed above. The OS, or open space zone, that is part of the zoning bylaw amendment application would permit a neighborhood park and a swim facility or a stormwater management facility. And the lands that are currently zoned as EP, there's a very small portion of the property that's currently zoned EP, are expected generally to remain as EP with some small modifications to reduce that area. So as for where the site itself is located, it is a lot located at 412 Miller, and the legal description there is part of lots 1687 to 1689 and 1691 of lot 1690 of Plan 309. The lands surrounding the site are all currently used for residential purposes, and the lands are within the urban area of Meaford. The property is approximately 7 hectares in area, and the lands front Miller Street, which is an open and maintained county road. So it's both a county road and a municipal road, which can cause confusion, but both things are true. So we can dive into the official plan policies now, because I do think it gives some really good context for why this development is slated for and proposed for where it is. So in the Grey County official plan, the lands are designated as primary settlement area, And so the lands that are in primary settlement areas are intended for a range of uses. That includes residential, commercial, industrial, recreational, institutional. And primary settlement areas are to be the focus of most of the growth within the county. And intensification opportunities like this proposal includes are strongly encouraged in these areas. The proposed development is intended to be serviced entirely by municipal services. And that is the preferred type of servicing for development in settlement areas. And that's noted in the Grey County official plan. So the schedule that you see there shows the lands. The area that's entirely red is primary settlement area. The small green area are the hazard lands. So you'll see that they are a pretty small portion of the site. Moving on to the Meaford official plan, the lands are designated as urban living area in the Meaford official plan. Similarly, it permits a variety of housing types, including single detached, semi-detached, townhouse, multiple units and apartments. And any rezoning application for making changes to the lands will need to be consistent with our official plan and norm. And so it will need to meet the following policies. It will need to be respecting the character of the existing neighborhood. It will need to be able to integrate into the surrounding area. It will need to certainly not cause any traffic concerns or hazards and provide sufficient parking on site. And finally, it will need to be serviced by municipal water and sewer. Similarly, you can see the urban living area is in that pale yellow on the schedule or the map. And the green is our environmental protection. Environmental protection and hazard lands can kind of be seen as interchangeable terms. Okay, moving into the zoning of the lands. The area that's all in brown is D4 development. Again, the green area is environmental protection. And the lands that have been zoned as D the purpose of that zone is to limit development in locations where municipal services are not fully available, which is true of this site. There is municipal water running along the frontage of the site currently, but there is no municipal wastewater at the moment. And the lands in the EP zone are environmental. Like I said, they're hazard lands in which there aren't any buildings or structures that are permitted, and there aren't any proposed as part of this application. So as for the request for the changes to the zoning as part of the zoning bylaw amendment application, the request is to rezone from D to, as I mentioned earlier, R2 to permit the semi-detached dwellings, R3 to permit the single detached dwellings, RM to permit the townhouse and multiple dwellings, and the OS area would be for the neighborhood park and the swim facility. As I mentioned, the municipal water is available on Miller Street, and the site is proposed to be accessed via the municipal road, Miller Street, via municipal road that would connect to Miller Street, sorry. And there is the request at the moment for the sewer to extend to the site from the east, but further servicing information will be provided as we go through the process and as the file moves forward through the typical municipal process. So speaking of process, we're at our process slide. So just as with Denise's file, we're currently at the stage of the public meeting. We have received the application, we've conducted our initial review and we've deemed it complete. We're here today to speak with all of you, and then we will do a complete review and we will listen to everything and take back all of your feedback and make sure that it all gets incorporated into the staff report, which includes our recommendation to council. Then council will make their decision to pass or to not pass the zoning bylaw amendment. Then there would be an appeal period in this scenario, unlike Denise's file. And then the decision is filed if there aren't any appeals. So you can stay engaged in this process in the same way that you can stay engaged in the ARU process. You can sign up to receive updates on our website at that link. You can also submit comments on the proposal to our general planning inbox, which is planning@meaford.ca. And finally, you can make a request in writing to planning@meaford.ca, so that same email, in order to be notified of the decision on the file. So that's the end of my presentation, and I'm just going to take a seat, if that's all right with you, Mr. Chair, to go through the comments.
Oh, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we had quite a few comments for this file. And I apologize if it gets a little lengthy, but I thought it was important to convey what we've heard so far at this stage. So the comments I'll start with the comments that have been received from the agencies. Historic Saugeen Métis Lands, Water and Consultation Department had no opposition or objection to the proposed zoning bylaw amendment as it was presented. And similarly, Enbridge Gas had no objection to the application, but they did reserve the right to amend or remove any development conditions as they come up. The next set of comments are the county comments. Generally, the county planning staff didn't have any concerns with the proposed zoning bylaw amendment. The small area of hazard that I mentioned in the presentation is intended to be used as open space, which complies with the Grey County official plan. Comments were received from County Transportation Services, noting that an entrance permit would be required from them should the subdivision be granted approval. And they noted that there are daylight triangles in appropriate daylight triangles near the entrance onto Grey Road 12. So Miller Street and Grey Road 12 are the two names. The county road is Grey Road 12. Municipal road is Miller Street. They also noted that the stormwater management indicates post-development flows will generally match pre-development flows based on their review. And they noted that they won't require or insist on a road widening conveyance unless it's requested by municipality of Meaford. Their final comment noted that the 75-foot setback from proposed buildings to the center line of the county right-of-way will need to be maintained. And if the applicant and their team will need an exemption, that would need to be applied for if it's necessary. The next set of comments are from planning county ecology staff. So they did review the studies that were provided as part of the application. They recommended a review of the assessment provided within the environmental impact study be undertaken with a qualified ecologist to ensure compliance with the Endangered Species Act at the time of site alteration. So that's a bit further down the road, but I thought I'd mention that comment now. Staff also noted that site alteration and vegetation removals should occur between October 1st and March 31st, which is outside of the active breeding, roosting, nesting season for all at-risk species and birds. And if site alteration is required outside of that window, the area should be screened for nests/roosting by a qualified ecologist prior to any construction activities. They also noted that development activities should be contained within the proposed development area and delineated prior to construction to ensure that no deviation from the intended removals will occur. They noted that equipment maintenance should be undertaken in areas removed from the retained natural areas. Fuel and chemical storage should follow appropriate legislation to ensure that it's maintained and stored in a way that's not going to result in accidental spills to neighborhood areas. Refueling of any equipment should occur at least 30 meters from the retained natural features. Potentially contaminated materials, including but not limited to fill, soil, gravel, or excavated materials, should be moved by equipment and controlled to prevent the spread of invasive species. And all equipment and boots and clothing will have to be cleaned prior to make sure that nothing is getting imported or exported on and off the site. Sediment and erosion controls should be installed along the limits of the development area prior to any construction activities, and they should remain in place until all site works have been completed. No development activities are permitted within the adjacent retained natural areas. I mentioned the environmental protection block. They note that that area should be naturalized with native herbaceous, shrubby, and woody species. And they note that the naturalization of the 5-meter setback should occur at the outset of site alteration, and naturalization of the remaining 10-meter setback should occur immediately after the final grade is achieved. They noted that if there are any animals that are injured or found injured during the construction phase of the project, that they should be transported to an appropriate wildlife rehabilitation center. And in terms of their review of the preliminary stormwater management report, they noted that provided that the erosion and water quality treatment measures are implemented in the design, in addition to submitting a fulsome ESC plan, county staff have no concerns. And they also note that the permanent controls for culvert inlets /outlets, emergency overflow weirs, and the swim facility should be included in the final design. Finally, they also reviewed the hydrological assessment, and they had no further comments from a natural heritage perspective on that front. Final 2 comments from them were that the applicant will need to contact the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks to ensure that the endangered and threatened species policy of the provincial policy statement is met. And finally, there are protection areas on the site that are subject to policies of the Source Water Protection Act. And so the applicant will also need to contact the risk management official of drinking water source water protection for their comments on the application. The final set of agency comments came from the Grey Bruce Public Health Unit. So a lot of these comments have to do with creating a healthy built environment and relate to things such as complete streets and ensuring that the community is built to support human health. So they recommend the applicant consider the features of a healthy development checklist, which has been provided. There's a link to it, which has been provided to the applicant regarding types of things to include in order to make a healthy built environment. They also recommend installing sidewalks on the development road, cycling infrastructure, introducing reduced speed limits and traffic calming measures, and other complete street design measures. They recommend the outdoor space be designed to be accessible to a wide range of age and mobility levels. And they also recommend adequate lighting to be installed in the neighborhood, parking areas, and along the road in order to ensure safety. They recommend landscaping and shade trees to be included in site plans, particularly along the development road and in the green space. And they also recommend introducing a play structure in the neighborhood park area and also introducing a community garden. Finally, they note that, and also a shade structure in a common area is recommended, such as a pavilion. Their final comment was that any features that reduce air pollution, water pollution, and urban heat islands, including porous and light-colored pavement materials and planting trees and shrubs, have co-net benefits for human and environmental health. So those are all recommendations for the proponent to keep in mind. Okay, now that's all of the agency comments. I'll run through now the public comments that have been received. Some of the people who provided written comments are here today. So if there's anything that I miss, I hope that they can provide lots of clarity to you in that regard. Yes. So the first letter was from Neil Cousineau. Thank you. Cousineau, who recommended that, I'm just gonna, just give me a moment.
Oh, I'm glad I'm not the only one with paper problems tonight.
I'm gonna read it from my computer. Just 1 second.
It's a lot
There we
to
go.
keep track of.
Okay. Mr. Cousineau recommended that a working group be created to work along with council and provided details on how that working group could look in regard to this proposal. He also requested more information and on the locations and the costs of water, wastewater, pump stations, and any underground facility. And related to that, had questions around what the extra burden to the municipal water and wastewater supply, noting that the wastewater supply is nearing capacity in the municipality. Related to that, they also had questions about the expected cost and timeline of the servicing for existing residents that would have to potentially connect into the servicing once it's provided to the site. They also had questions regarding the provision of services in the municipality. So with an increase in development, are there enough fire, police, medical, hospital, doctor services in town to support the growth? And the related tax increase for those increased levels of service. And they also had questions regarding and comments around the debris removal and cleanup sort of in the construction phase, and any dust and pollutants during construction. And finally, had questions around fencing the site, including the materials and height. So all of those comments I just want to add there are comments that were received at least twice, so by different members of the community. The rest of the comments that I'm going to summarize are more things that came up less frequently, but you may also still see some overlap. Further questions and comments included some preferences for against high density neighborhoods, and noted that the affordability of the neighborhood was kind of brought as a question. Similarly, had a request against no short-term rentals in the property, and also having some resale penalties, so to prevent people from buying and selling properties in a rapid manner. And then finally had comments regarding parks, green space, and wetland protection to be completed at the start of the project and then maintained throughout. And also had questions about making sure that there are provisions for if there was a case where flooding occurred on the site, provisions for surrounding properties to not have any impact from that flooding, including a retaining wall as a solution to that. There was a request in his comments for phase development with predetermined completion dates, and also relocating the existing Miller Street mailboxes to a safer area that's cleaner. And finally, had some comments about, and this was another one that came up more than once, was making sure that the roads are designed to support garbage, fire, tractor trailers, school buses, anything that's larger, which is a pretty common thing that comes up for files like this. Okay, that was all of his comments. We'll move on to Bob Sewell.
Close.
Okay, that's what we'll go. You can always correct me if you wish. So we had a couple of set of comments from Mr. Sewell, mostly related to transportation and roads, how the roads are going to be impacted by the development, including the concerns with the current state of the roads, an increase in traffic and speeding on all of the major roads, including Nelson and Pearson, and Nelson Street West, Nelson and Gardner, and Miller Street Hill. And the question of any intersection improvements that are required, who is to pay for that work. And similarly, the cost to taxpayers for assuming the road A, for the municipality assuming that road. That he also noted that you wanted to have further clarification on block 46 of the draft plan in terms of the definitions of medium density, and similarly some other terms that came up in the submission regarding mid-market prices and modest income residents. There was a comment to request the postponement of a rezoning and physical starts of the subdivision until council has had a chance to digest all of the comments received. And also had a comment about the grade of the property being raised, saying that the reason for this may be to combat the high water table that's in the area. He mentioned as well having a trade-off to maintain the existing lands as agricultural and do a development in another location instead. And as part of that, made a recommendation that instead the property gets rezoned as agricultural, if not to deny, and then if that were not the case, to deny or delay the rezoning to residential multiple. And finally, there was a request to have further tests to ensure that there aren't any impact to surrounding properties, much like the flooding point, in terms of water and soil contamination issues. Okay, just two more public comments to summarize. Next one was from Alan Weller. The concerns noted were, well, the positives, I should say, that were noted here are the increased availability of affordable housing that the proposal provides, and an increased tax base for the municipality, and an increase in business for local ventures, and also to help that the proposal would help to promote Meaford as an open for business community. But the things that Mr. Weller was concerned about were the disruption to the neighborhood community for the years of construction, the increase in ambient noise levels, fire and theft problems on the construction site. There were concerns from him regarding trees. So if there were any trees that were on a property line, who would be responsible for if they fell or died or something similar. And then the final comment was about ensuring that the pedestrian access and cycling and trail requirements of the official plan are met. And he noted that the sidewalk doesn't appear to continue to Miller Street in the draft plan. The final set of comments are from Scott May, who noted that two accesses to the property are required in the Grey County official plan, where one is proposed. And I think we noted in the transportation comments that they were satisfied with the entrances. He also had a question on how the studies had been peer reviewed, the studies that were submitted by the applicant. Also, he asked if developments that were ahead of this application have been accounted for in terms of the allocation of wastewater capacity in the wastewater treatment plant. And he finally made a recommendation for a landscape buffer that exceeds the required setbacks to all of the adjacent low-density residential development that's surrounding the site. So that's all the public comments, and I just wanted to quickly make a few comments on the types of comments that we'd like to receive from the public.
Your chance to speak is coming. Sorry, Meredith.
That's okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as I noted in my presentation, the lands are already designated for under planning policy at the county and the municipal level for urban style development. As I mentioned before, higher density, full municipal services. These lands have been designated as such to accommodate for the future and current and future anticipated growth of our respective community. While we are here to seek your feedback and your thoughts on the proposed development, what will really help us the most in our evaluation of the application is if you share your local knowledge about the site. So that really makes sure that we have all the information that we need to fully assess the proposal, and it'll allow us to select and apply the right tools and conditions to any approval to manage the change effectively. So for example, the types of constructive feedback that we'd love to hear from you are regarding the proposed ratio of housing types of single and multi-detached, or the layout of the proposed development, any traffic related considerations, things related to landscaping, fencing, or drainage, or parkland features, or really any unique features of the property or the local area that may not be reflected in the application materials. And similarly, the known local history of the lands. So if there was any, flooding or ponding of water, soil or slope erosion, things of that nature, the kinds of things that we'd like to hear about tonight. So that's all of my comments for you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. I understand that Colin Travis, the planning consultant on behalf of the applicant, is here with a presentation. Mr. Travis, if you'll come to the microphone and introduce yourself for the public record. That microphone right back there. There you are.
I'd get it eventually, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Good evening to you, Mayor Kentner and members of council. For the record, my name is Colin Travis. And tonight I'm joined with Peter Tollefson, who is working with me on this file as part of the planning team, and Andrew Overholt of Tatham, who is our project engineer. And Tatham's are undertaking the civil and traffic and some related environmental work. Let's see. As Meredith, well, the other thing I should mention with the permission, Mr. Mayor, is that we also have Stephanie Lacey Avon here with Grey County, because we are dealing with two applications: the application for a subdivision agreement, a subdivision approval, a draft plan of subdivision. And as you know, the approval authority for the draft plan of subdivision application lies with Grey County, and they rely heavily on input from the municipality with regards to recommendations and concerns and what have you. The second reason for this meeting, obviously, is to look at the zoning bylaw amendment, and the purpose of the zoning bylaw amendment is to implement the draft plan of subdivision approval that we're seeking. So the two are intertwined. However, Grey County is the approval authority for the subdivision. The municipality is the approval authority for the zoning bylaw. I'm going to whiz through the first few things because Meredith went through this stuff. With this slide, with using a color schema, what we're attempting to do is show the distribution of land uses color-wise on the proposed draft plan. The yellow color would indicate the single detached and semi-detached units. I guess the orangey color that would be along the frontage of Miller Street would be street townhouses. They would be fronting onto a municipal road and not onto Miller Street. To the left-hand side is the medium density block, and we've heard several comments about the medium density block tonight. And in the middle with the green and the blue would be the proposed neighborhood park that is adjacent to the required stormwater management system. There's a little other color that is to the north, which identifies the environmental protection area. And again, through the official plan review and Meredith, we saw that little green area that is to the northwest there. If I'm going to go back to this slide. So with the key characteristics on this draft plan, first and foremost, during the pre-consultation process that would have been 2022 with the town and with Grey County and a couple of the commenting agencies. The plan that we had presented at that time, the 2 or 3 takeaway comments were the county wanted land for widening of Miller Street, so a road conveyance dedication, and we've accounted for that in the proposed draft plan. The county also asked us to reduce the number of access points off Miller Street, so we did that with providing just one access. And there were comments with regards to the more central location of the required neighborhood park and the stormwater management, which we do show on this plan. So we did make several changes to the plan that was subject to pre-consultation based on input from Grey County and from local planning staff. With regards to the road network, again, it's basically a loop road with one access off Miller Street. The intent is to have that road as a public, we're going to convey that road to the town as a public town road. It will be designed to have an urban design cross-section that'll include streetlights and sidewalks. It will have also traffic control, like stop signs and other warning signs in the internal layout. The Miller Street is going to, again, be the main, the access point into the subdivision. And the lands to the medium density block is intended to be a condominium, a townhouse condominium block that would have access off that central loop road. There are no specific designs for that right now, but we are seeking zoning to permit a townhouse type of condominium on those red colored lands. This is the copy of the actual draft plan itself. This is the formal application that is or the formal plan that is before Grey County for draft plan approval. It provides the meets and bounds description of the plan I showed in 2 slides ago. And also, again, a bigger copy, if it can be accessed on site on the town's website, will show a land use breakdown of the open space areas, the stormwater management areas, the residential areas. It also has the breakdown of the number of units in the draft plan, and those number of units will also be reflected in the zoning bylaw that is intended to implement the draft plan. And those would include 18 single detached dwelling units, 46 semi-detached, 26 street townhouse units, and maximum of 75 condominium units in the northwest area. The park block, in conjunction with the stormwater management block, there's a blow up here on this section, is intended to be designed together so that it's an integrated open space system. The park block itself represents approximately the 5% that is required under the Planning Act. And again, will be designed in conjunction with a stormwater management pond, which is a more contemporary way of dealing with both open space and stormwater management facilities. The zoning bylaw, again, with our submission, we provided the details of the proposed zoning bylaw. Meredith went through the changes that we're seeking. Again, the existing lands are Zone D, and we're seeking specific zones to reflect the various uses within the draft plan. The other thing I'd note is that part of is not unusual, and I'm seeing it more and more often these days with the zoning bylaw to have holding provisions. And the purpose of the holding provisions would be, for example, to make sure that there is adequate servicing available before proceeding with construction with the development. Another example of a holding provision is entering into a development agreement, a subdivision agreement, which also identifies the requirements for, again, servicing, very detailed infrastructure design requirements, as well as construction management programs. And the construction management program, for example, would include how the lands would be developed and how the lands would be serviced, including where construction would be staged and the phasing of construction on the subdivision. This is a list of the, again, supporting studies and reports. For the most part, these are standard requirements. They include the engineering, the traffic, stormwater management, servicing, archaeological, among other things. This is where, again, a lot of the comments that we have received, and there were a lot of comments and very good comments on this plan. It's going to help us deal with addressing areas where we were not clear enough, and there is room for more clarity and explanation. There are also a lot of issues and concerns over the nature of the development as far as density and range of units. And this is where this planning policy, whether we like it or not, is a key feature in anything that comes before this municipality. Because as you know full well, any applications, any decisions made by an approval authority, which includes the town of Meaford Council as well as Grey County Council, have to have consideration for the provincial planning policy statement. And we know, again, your own official plan that was recently updated was updated in part to bring you up to date with the 2020 PPS, as was the Grey County official plan in 2019 and OPA 11, I think, last year. And again, this is to bring up county official plan policy and Meaford official plan policy in line with the provincial policy statement. And the provincial policy statement, and again, these higher order planning principles are in the provincial planning policy statement. And whether we like it or not, sometimes they're mandated, which is there's a need for a compact urban development. There's a need for the provincial policy says there's a need for a efficiency of land use efficiency. Land use efficiency is usually equated with increasing density. And the equation part of that is more people contributing to public services such as water, sewer, and in some areas transit and related services. So the province is asking and directing municipalities and the counties and planners to have consideration and and be consistent with these provincial planning policies. And the trickle-down effect would be, for example, in the Grey County official plan, on these subject lands, the designation requires, or a policy requires a compact urban form, an efficient urban form, and this is what we're providing. It's probably why during the pre-consultation process and the subsequent comments from Grey County, there was a request to consider a wider range of the dwelling unit types. And as we said in my introduction, and as Meredith explains, we're proposing single detached lots, semi-detached lots, street towns, and condominium towns. So there's a variety there. We're not proposing apartments, but there is a variety of unit types. One of the side bars to that sort of PPS, provincial policy guidance that's reflected in Grey County and the local official plan, is there is also a relationship between housing form and density with housing affordability or the price of housing. So obviously with this plan, we're not proposing estate lots. We're proposing, again, single detached lots that are averaging 15 or 16 meters wide, semi-detached lots that are averaging 8 or 9 meters wide, and as I said, street towns and condominium towns. This is why we were referring to trying to hit that middle market as far as home ownership is concerned. It's not low end, and it's certainly not the estate type subdivision. And I think going through the process, these land use efficiency, the density, the intensity, all these terms are coming about as we go through the land use planning process. And the net result of all of those things would be basically a subdivision design that we're proposing. This is a reflection of the policies that are in place right now. Now, as I said before, I was able to read through a lot of the comments in terms of the clarification on engineering, the traffic planning, the service planning, the grading. We will have an opportunity to delve more into those questions and those concerns. And part of the tool that we use, Mr. Mayor and members of council, with your offices, with your departments, is a comments matrix. So we will take all of these comments and put them down into a list. And then we will also give our response to each of those comments. So you can see the response to those comments, those questions, and those concerns. We provide that to planning staff who then know what we're thinking, what our response is. And as Meredith indicated, while that's going on, these applications are being circulated to your individual in-house departments as well as your peer reviewers. So, and again, as I said, a lot of those comments that came from the public, I get it. I know where they're coming from, and we will address them as I said, with staff to the best of our ability with clarification And again, we were here to work with the municipality in Grey County. Mr. Mayor, that's Mr. Council, that's the end of my presentation. And if you have any questions of me, I'm here. Otherwise, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move along, given the time, and we have 8 pre-registrations for this meeting from members of the public. And the first registrant is Doug Armstrong. You have your opportunity to speak, Mr. Armstrong. And the microphone is actually on, and I think we'll leave it on there for you. And the subsequent speakers.
No, I don't need that. Concerns about the condominium block. Can you bring that slide back up? It showed it. Can you bring this piece back up?
We'll see if we can.
Anyway,
Eric, do you know where it is?
they lost it already? That's it.
Okay, you got it. Thank you.
Okay, so where the condominium block comes down and meets the 3 properties that are coming in off of, as you're calling it, Street A. How close is Street A coming to the first property there? Because it looks like it's coming right up to the very corner of tip of my property. And I can just see in the wintertime, because there's no space there, somebody going through my fence or into whatever's there, because there's nothing to stop anything. I can assume by this that the road that goes across there, which is, I think it's an 8-meter wide road, that there would be no condominiums built down that section, only up in the larger section. Is that correct?
I don't think that we have the capacity to have a dialogue, do we, or do we not? No. So I think what the proponent and staff will make notes on your questions, and those questions will, be considered in all of the responses to them will be considered in the planning report that will come to council.
Okay, that was my concern.
Okay, well, thank you very kindly. The next registrant is Matthew Fulford. Mr. Fulford. Is he not present? The next registrant is Rob Morris. Okay, just speak right up, or we can maybe bring.
Thank you. Sorry.
No, that's good.
I think my answers have been.
We aim to please, but speak into the microphone there.
The questions have been answered that I was going to ask, other than when the sewer comes up past my dad's property, it's been septic they've lived there for 50 years. Is that something we have to hook on to? Or is that something that we can still stay on sewer on his property? That was a question that I had. Or septic, sorry. Yeah, if we can stay on septic.
There was a conversation on that today with Mr. Voigt, who's the department head, and I think that what I heard was that there may not be immediate pressure to do that, and certainly if anybody is on has a vacant property that it goes by. Sorry, if it goes by your property. With a house on it, I don't think it's going to affect you immediately anyway. But there is a charge for when it goes by a vacant property, and that probably would apply. Because that sewer line and water line increases the value of the property at that point. That was the short answer anyway. The next registrant was Bob Sewell. Bob?
Thanks, sweet. Thank you, Your Worship and Council. My name's Bob Sewell. I've lived in Meaford all my life, and I've resided at 30 Gardner Street for 30 plus years. So I have a really invested interest in this. I want to take you back, and I want to ask you a question right off the bat that needs to be answered. How did we get here? This property at 412 Miller Street has been used for agriculture since prior to 1958. Okay, it's currently being used as agriculture. The crops were taken off last fall. How did we get here? When was it zoned development? And if it was zoned agriculture prior to being zoned development, when was that? And were there public meetings? Because if it's been in the last 34 years, I am not aware of any request for us to come to say agriculture to development, because we would have fought it then.
And I don't know if anyone can provide an answer. If you can, that'd be great. Thanks.
I just recently spoke with a person who said that Mr. and Mrs. Fred Mason owned the property. It had been an apple orchard for most of its life. Strawberry patch, potato patch. They did market gardening before market gardening was a thing. And it was sold to Dave Shaw in the mid-60s. And this was or used as an orchard then. The 60s getting into my lifetime, and I can remember being always an orchard. It was an orchard and a raspberry patch. When we moved there, they took the apples out, or the raspberry patch and the apples out, and it's been farmed by an individual. They're making money off this as an agriculture property right now. I know what the government says. I know that they want to use the urban part of municipality. I get that. But there are exceptions to every rule. And this is the biggest exception. It's currently being used as agriculture. It's always been used as agriculture as far as I can remember. And I'll get into the other part of it soon. So I don't understand why we're here.
So you've made a speech on that, and you know, I don't think you're looking for an answer right now. So
no, okay,
let's keep going.
The other thing is that page 8, section 2.2 of the report, I believe issued by the development, said that there was a traffic study done on Miller Street. It was a one-day traffic study on Wednesday, September 27th, from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. and from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. That gives you an average of what? One day? Like, come on. That thing, and I can tell you right now, the traffic increases essentially a lot in the summer just from the people running the leaf management waste and back. So you can't do it in one day. So those are inaccurate facts right off the bat. I'm trying to summarize from what they summarized. My question is, all these questions on these two reports that I sent in, they will be answered. Is that what I'm hearing? Okay. The other thing that I wanted to add, because police, fire, and hospital were mentioned, but schools weren't. We got a brand new school. I can't see the Board of Education putting any more money into that school for a few years, the way they act. Thornbury needs a new school. Our current school has 6 portables. 7. Thornbury has 4 portables. Half of those students from Thornbury come to Meaford when they graduate in grade 8, at least half. The other half may go to Collingwood. Our school is bursting at the seams right now. And we're going to add potentially another 1,000 kids. How can we do this? How can we as a community stand there and say, we're going to jeopardize our students' education because we want to build fast and bigger? That makes no sense to me. It just doesn't. I'm sorry. And I'm passionate about this because I lived in this town all my life. I protected this town for 30 years, in my opinion, and I'm very passionate about Meaford.
Thank you, Bob.
My last one. Anyone knows the area at 412 Miller Street and surrounding area is known to have an extremely high water table. Adding to my already knowledge of this was reinforced as speaking to the parents and the people in the area. They continuously fight and they have water issues every year, every day, and they can all attest to that. In regarding to the report, site grading report, the report indicated the current grade of the property should be raised from 1 to 4 meters. That's 13 feet. 13 feet they're going to put topsoil in that one section. And we know, when I put it in here, if you take a saturated sponge, set it on a table, put some dirt on that saturated sponge, the weight of that is going to push the water to the sides. That's common science. You can grade that, you can do whatever you want. We don't know whether that's a river or an ocean. in that area. So how can you successfully say that you can drain that area, you can drain the subdivision, and you may be able to drain 412, but what about the people around it? And we know when you put downward pressure on and the water goes out, where does that water go? It goes to the weakest root, which is basements. So how can this group here, and I'm going to ask that one question here, and I know you're not going to answer it. I'm asking you, given the current high water table and these facts, can council or the planning department here and now on the record say for sure that this will not happen to the residents around 412 Miller Street? Can you say that now? Can you people say that?
You've had your time, Bob. Thank you. Yes,
Wait.
Denise?
Sorry,
It's a full report. They get a full report and I get 3 minutes. This smells, Ross, this smells.
Well, yeah, Denise is willing, Denise is.
Okay, hold on.
willing to
yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to just note, I know people have a lot of questions, and so I'm not attempting, I'm going to answer them in this while I'm speaking now, but we'll have the ability, so what we're going to be doing is writing down questions, and we will be creating a document with some answers with the applicant's team, should those be questions that they should be best answering, and provide that for folks to be able to see. We'll have probably posted on the website. But what I just wanted to note, if there is the ability for us to make any answers now, if they're simple questions, Meredith or I will be answering those at the end. So we'll take, rather than going back and forth, as you've noted, Mr. Mayor, we'll just write a few things down. And at the end, we have the ability to kind of make additional comments. And the applicant's team also has that chance to kind of sum things up. So we will, if there's anything really simple, we will try to answer it today. And anything complex, we will be looking into it and coming back at a later time through both the report and through a public document that we'll create. And I just wanted to remind everyone that I know everyone's really passionate about their community, that they do have to remember that we have to accept a proposal to review it. So when someone provides us with an application form, we have to take it. So we take it in and we review it and have the public meeting because it's required by law. So we don't have the ability to send it back and say, I don't think people will like it. We can't look at this right now. But we do have to go through the motions of reviewing and having this public process. So just allowing people to kind of just take that with a grain of salt to understand that it's not the municipality didn't propose this, and now we're not saying it's right, good or bad. I'm just saying we are just processing paperwork right now and going through the motions of what we have to do with a file. And we are taking folks' questions and comments very seriously, and we will try to get some answers back for people before a decision is made, if that's fair.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just want to say, I thank you for that. I apologize because I am so passionate, and I do apologize to you, and I apologize to council.
Thank you, Bob. And Meredith?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I just wanted to quickly add, in my summary of comments, I didn't recognize some of the comments that I summarized by name, but we got comments from Terry and Darlene Nitzman. Thank you. So I just wanted to acknowledge that I did summarize their comments, but and Mr. Nitzman is here to speak to his comments as well.
Okay. Oh, so there, I add one to the list there?
No, he's on the list.
Okay. And if I could just take a moment, and I don't want to put you on the spot, Margaret, but I'm going to defer to you as our clerk. Is there a specified time length of presentations in a planning meeting, or do you know that?
Thank you, Your Worship. We don't have a specified time. It would really just be
okay.
The meeting.
I'm just trying to give everybody roughly the same time, and definitely the proponent has more time. But I will tell you that, and I've been on record that one of the biggest surprises I got as a councillor and disappointments was that the planning process is maybe not all that you think it is. It really is quite different than I thought it was, and the fact of the matter is, the whole idea of considering the subdivision in question today is not something that rests with this council. It rests with Grey County Council. So, let's move on. Jennifer Burak, is she still here? Did she leave? Okay. Terry Nutzbahn.
Good evening, Mayor Kentner and Council. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak. I think most of the points have already been covered by the previous speakers, so I won't take up any more time to go over them. But the couple things I would like to go over for myself as being a property owner of 80 Gardner Street, and if it would be possible for Meredith maybe to bring up an aerial shot, please. And I'll just read this here right now. I have concerns with the trees, most as high as 50 feet or more on my property. They are located along the northwest corner of 412 Miller Street, which runs west to east. The length of the proposed condo block 46. These trees are primarily white pine and white spruce. I was told by the previous owner. He planted approximately 2,000 of these trees approximately 30 years ago. And I was just wondering how these trees will be dealt with in terms of legality, not to mention the safety. If any tree happens to fall due to one, any change in water drainage, less or more from the development, and two, storm wind or any other natural occurrence. I guess we're not going to get an answer today, but this is something I would like to have put in to deal with it. And I don't know if you can see there or not, the northwest corner where my property is, it's on Gardner Street, and you can see all those trees right there. And it pretty much runs the length of the condo block. And also, will there be a fence erected around the property, around the development as well? And like what materials will be used and what height will be used. And that's to prevent trespassing onto my property and neighboring property. I've been there almost 20 years now, and I've had people wander in there, make fires. I found beer cases, booze bottles. So there is trespassing, but it's very limited at the time. There's not very many. There seemed to be more when the orchard was present, that I guess some of the workers would go in there. So I was just concerned about the influx of all the people, that they will think this is just a public land. They can just wander around at will. And if there happens to be a fire there, God forbid, that forest, since it's all pine, is going to go up just like all our other forest fires. And it will be, a hazard to the neighborhood. The other thing I was concerned about was the sewer that's going to be proposed, and there were three options. Either the sewer was going to run up to Pearson Street. The reason in the report said they didn't want to use those is because pumping stations had to be used. So the proposed option was to run from Owen Street all the way up to Gardner Street. And I was wondering if the taxpayer was going to, or the developer was going to pay for the sewer expansion, or if the taxpayers would be responsible for the sewer expansion.
I hope you get your answers. So certainly the questions have been noted. So,
okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Neil Cousineau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I live beside Bob, so I'll be nice to him. My concern is the increased land that's going to be, or the infill and the retaining wall. Where is that going to be? I am the lowest property. I live between Terry and Bob, and I'm the lowest property. And every year at winter thaw, I have at least 1 inch to 10 or 12 inches of water in my backyard. I certainly don't need any more. So that's my main concern. And the condo block backing onto my property. How high is it going to be? And who's going to maintain it? Is there going to be a fence to prevent people from whatever the condo block or the neighborhood coming into my property, which is very rural? Like if somebody's back there, they could go into my shop, my garage, that kind of thing. There's no privacy. There's no more protection, which is really the reason why I moved to Meaford, to that property 12 years ago. There was a farm in the backyard. Obviously that's going away. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Yep, thank you very much. And finally, Derek Trask.
My issue was water. Basically, I'm at the southeast corner of the development. And we get a lot of water issues coming from the west. And what I was concerned about is with the townhouses going up next to my house, the exact size of the lots and the townhouses. Now, you probably don't have the answer to that. I'm gonna have to speak to the developer to get that information. But I was concerned about with the raising of the ground and the grading they're going to do, how that is going to affect the water problems that I'm having with the house and the property.
So that completes the list of the registered, oh, and you,
I spoke with Meredith
yep,
a little.
oh, sorry.
She said
Please come and just give your name there and.
Look, my name is David Solers. I'd like to speak about liability and who that liability would be downloaded to if and when any of these flooding issues occur. The planner for the developer also mentioned that there's strong legislation from the Ontario government. So on record, I'd like to mention that the liability, if and when any of these flooding issues happen, it'd be shared with the Ontario government as well as, sadly enough, you guys. I've written down some thoughts that I'd like to say. I have no questions to ask you. So good afternoon, Your Honor. I'm not sure. Your Worship, I'm not sure how our fellow council and my fellow citizens of the municipality of Meaford. Thank you for allowing me to present my concerns on the proposed zoning bylaw amendment and related plan of subdivision for 412 Miller Street. The proposed zoning bylaw amendments came to my attention a few weeks ago in the form of a letter stating that the current developer would like to amend the change of the current zoning from a D, which are actually now in question of how it became a D, to a few different iterations of R, meaning residential development. I'm a builder myself, and I know firsthand how important it is that suitable vacant land be used for additional housing as our communities grow. In fact, has it been a focus of the current provincial government where they have put into place some aggressive legislation to allow for growing communities to more easily create housing for our expanding populations. I have no issues with this, but I feel that much of this legislation was devised and intended, pardon me, for the outlying communities surrounding the GTA. I don't believe the intention of this aggressive legislation is to oversaturate small communities with our overly dense residential areas, which don't meet the overall character of the current neighborhoods. This specific issue, which I would like to focus on. You'll hear many of my neighbors discuss equally valid issues which focus on traffic, policing, community safety, fire and emergency services, public utilities such as water and sewer, which is interesting with the ARU. It's going to now have a larger downflow, potentially ×3. Potential flooding of our current and long-standing homes and properties, night sky pollution, groundwater and environmental issues, sound pollution, and general lack of consideration for the people who have lived here for multiple generations and invested their lives and passions in their homes and properties. When I received the letter, I read through all the information and in an effort to digest it fully. The first significant inconsistency with the local municipality's official plan was the request by the developer for a multi-residential zone on this complex parcel. He's proposing to rezone this technically complex parcel of land, which is cut off distant from the main highway, technically it's a highway, into a high-density multi-residential elevated island of houses disconnected from the existing community that abuts and tower over the existing homes, potentially. We don't know yet because cart's before the horse. I've been building houses for decades and I've had to navigate the NEC, Grace Hubble Conservation Authority, as well as various municipal planners and inspectors. One of the most memorable conversations I have had, which changed the way I approach and understand how the system works, was with a fellow named Tim Lanthier, who is currently the CAO of the Grace Hubble Conservation Area. We were stuck on an issue where what I wanted to build would not be allowed due to the 100-year flood regulations, potentially potentially, and possibly causing the riverbank to breach, and in turn pushing over the framework supporting what I wanted to build. I was frustrated and could not understand why this matter. I could not understand why this would matter. And Tim explained eloquently how the system works. We have governing bodies in place to look out for us. Taxpayers and citizens who all share a space need to follow legislated rules and regulations for our own safety. We vote for, support, and put our trust in these governing bodies, and the decisions which these bodies make put them at risk of liability if something should go wrong. Thus, all decisions in the end are based on legislation and, most importantly, liability. So if that small entry roof I wanted to build was knocked over and crushed someone, when by chance the river breached, the Gray Sable Conservation Authority would be liable for allowing it to be built. Yet here we are with another decision in front of a group of governing bodies. The municipality of Meaford, the county of Gray, again, the Gray Sable Conservation Area. After talking with a number of lawyers, town planners, planning consultants, past council members, and some other professionals who deal in these matters often, it seems what's most pertinent when considering a zone change is suitable and applicable is whether it contravenes any policies established within the official plan in effect. I don't intend to discuss the numerous contraventions in detail today, as they will be set out in letters submitted to all governing bodies, as I mentioned, well before the date of decision. As the town planner mentioned to me in our earlier meeting, the planner provides a brief of all topics in opposition to the proposed zoning amendment. My arguments will be presented to her for her brief. An example of a contravention of an existing official plan policy. The policy states in A.2.3.4, quote, to ensure that all new development and redevelopment is compatible in intensity and use and in terms of build form and characteristics with context of neighborhood streetscapes and public realm. I understand the term character and context may be qualitative aspects, so I undertook to find some quantitative aspects of character and context in the form of density. I've gone through the exercise of measuring the land area of the abutting properties, all of which are single detached homes on sizable properties, on sizable land. There is not one multi-residential unit directly abutting this proposed development parcel. There are a limited number of multi-residential buildings in the area, but none have a front yard setback in excess of 100 feet. And all have unobstructed access, visibility, and from a municipal street, which is easily accessible for emergency services. This proposed development has its highest density farthest away from the municipal street on a single available access point through a proposed densely populated proposed new neighborhood, making access by emergency services difficult, if not dangerously slow or even impossible. Pardon me. The specific concern regarding access will be expressed in detail in letters to follow. For an example, I used geomapping to measure the abutting properties, garnering a total of 152,277 square meters occupied by 36 residents, giving a value of 4,228 square meters of land per residence for the existing neighborhood. When I repeat the exact exercise for the overall proposed development, I got a value of 60,331 square meters. I might be a little bit off here and there, with a proposed 163 residential units, which gives a value of 370 square meters of land per residence. That compares 370 to 4,228. Even more concerning, when I measure the proposed area of multi-residential only, I get 9,900 square meters with a proposed residential unit count of 73. Our planner for the development said it's 75, so I'm not sure which it is. This gives a value of 135 square meters of land per residence. The proposed development is in excess of 30 times the density of the existing neighborhood, clearly violates the intent and policies of the local official plan. It appears that the developer has simply proposed a maximum build out for profitability rather than a proposal conductive with the policies of the official plans in effect, the land's hydrogeological and geological limitations, and the existing community character and context. Thank you for your time. I have a couple small points and then I'll close my trapper. This goes to Gray County specifically. Proposal does not comply with the Gray County Official Plan's General Transportation Policies 8.2.j regarding the number of accesses required to ensure safe access for vehicles and emergency vehicles. The proposal calls for 163 units, which under the OP requires two or more full accesses. So I'm not sure how it got past development stage when they said they could have one, and he's redesigned the whole plan around one. Confusing. There are reports from the applicable road authorities and, are there? That's my question. I'll scratch it because I said that has no questions. Lastly, it looks like they're throwing every type of housing they conceive together into this proposal. My strongest opposition is in regards to the multi-residential zoning. It is much too dense and opens the municipalities as well as the Ontario government to liability if they are to pass the zoning amendment. I suggest the planners reapply for an alteration to the proposal without the multi-residential zoning. Thank you all. And thank you, planners.
There have been no other pre-registrations to speak in person at this meeting by members of the public. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak tonight who did not pre-register? Go ahead.
Sorry about the short notice, Your Worship. I have a small family. I reside at 155 Gardner Street. And I didn't have a chance today because I was working to pre-register. And I didn't get a letter in early because I was busy on the weekend coaching hockey and helping kids in the community. So with that being said, I do have a question regarding the condominium block. And for those of you, I don't know if you know the geographical area, Gardner Street is the town line. Gardner Street is where garbage on one side gets picked up on Tuesdays, and on the other side of the street, it gets picked up on Thursdays. Okay. My question would be, is the size of the condominium block being so close to the rural line, to me, is a little drastic. It doesn't fit the landscape. My property is a one-story bungalow, single level. There are some regular style bungalows in the neighborhood across the street on the town side. Modest little homes. It's a starter village or a retiree village street, basically. And, you know, as a spot where I chose to raise my family, being on the town side, I grew up in the country. I grew up down around Thornbury area, loved the small town feel, and got a job within the area and decided to start my little family and carry on because I like that feel. The condo block, the size of the magnitude is 73 units. To me, it feels more like city-like. It feels to me like maybe something that it should be closer to the downtown. It would fit it better. It'd be a higher spot for urban where we could, you know, maybe make our transit routes come and go from. I do have a problem with servicing and water, like everybody else has said. And my main fear is I'm not opposed to growth in our municipality. I use our facilities on a regular basis. I sit and I watch Facebook, and I watch Deputy Mayor with her posts, updating everybody. Love it. Love it. That's how I stay in touch with what's going on. I read one post that said that when we were doing our budget deliberations, we put 1% of the budget, I believe is how it read, 1% to roads, 1% to facilities. To me, it doesn't matter who moves into that village. If it's retirees or young families, we still got to use our facilities. We got to keep our facilities updated for those people. You know, you bring 73 units plus however many townhomes in, you know, and they got a small outdoor space. They're going to be looking for facilities with maybe a running track or something to, you know, to keep them within the area. You go into our arena, our dressing rooms are small. You know, you go to put a hockey team, sometimes you got to use 2 rooms to put a hockey team in there because dressing rooms 2 and 3 are small. You know, I'm not the only one in the room here tonight with a small family who use the facilities such as the pool. You know, I use the pool, take my family to the Blue Dolphin, turn them loose. They go to the skate park, they use the ball diamonds. You know, I'm worried about the size of their green space, because there will be people who buy in there, whether it be retirees looking for the, you know, like the active lifestyle. And as a community, we should be supporting an active lifestyle. But I'm worried about the 1%, because to me, 1% doesn't go far. You know, you look at a chunk of road, a couple $100,000 doesn't go far when you start building a chunk of road. Or, you know, you have to put fixed dressing rooms or a compressor at the arena. You know, 70,000 doesn't go far when you start figuring up these expenditures to maintain, just to maintain the current infrastructure we have. You know, that's one of the reasons that I chose to live in Meaford, the small town feel. I chose to buy on the rural side of the line because the house was affordable. Now because I'm on the rural side, my policing costs me $100 more than across the road, because of the rural policing that we used to have. But at the end of the day, I think most of the people that are in this room, it doesn't matter what's built there. It's got to be friendly. Like your last, what do you call it? Your last slide for your small homes. People just want to see it friendly.
We missed your name, sir.
Sorry, my name is Morgan Hugel.
Thank you.
They just want to see it friendly.
I believe that completes all the speakers. Council's turn. Questions, Deputy Mayor?
Thank you very much, Your Worship. And I just want to start by saying, my gosh, I so appreciate all of you being here, sharing your comments. You're thoughtful and respectful, and you bring wise experience to the microphone, which I know is really valuable to the staff and to the proponents. So thank you for being here. I just want to add, my husband and I built 2 houses right across the street on Miller Street from this property. And so I want to reinforce the concerns with water. We certainly had water issues in our basement. In the last house we built, had to keep 2 sumps running all the time. So I'm very much appreciate all of your concerns with the water up in that area. I did want to ask a question for some clarification, though. On the section that is of most concern to people where the condos are proposed, it was mentioned during Mr. Travis's presentation that these were to be condominium towns. And I understand the concept of condominiums, but we were talking about condominium towns and townhouses. So I'm just wondering if I can get a little bit of information. I don't know if I can get that tonight or another time on the difference, or whether you just felt it offered potential buyers an option between one concept and the other, or if there's a difference in the construction, or do we recognize that those are going to be, two-story units, or are they going to be multiple stories? Just if at some point in time I can get a little clarification on that. Thank you.
Councillor Yurick, I think you had Councillor Greenfield.
Thanks, Your Worship. Thanks, everyone, for coming out this evening. Council does appreciate your concerns. We do listen to them, and they do have an impact on us. Just a couple of things, just a comment. Mr. Sewell was talking about agricultural property. We're talking about a 15-acre property. Sorry, I do acres and not hectares much better. Planted in soybeans, 51.5 soybeans per acre, bushels of soybeans per acre this year, which is very good. It was a very good year. That works out to $772.50 an acre. $11,587.50 for those 15 acres of crop. That's gross. That's not net. That's gross. But that's just an interesting figure, I thought, to kind of keep in mind when we're talking about this. This is a planning meeting, and this is going to be addressed under the Planning Act. The provincial one, the county one, our municipal one. Unfortunately, there's so much more involved here, and that mainly concerns infrastructure, traffic on Miller Street, and this sewer connection. I think there's going to be a lot of questions asked about that. I don't want Stephanie Lacey Avon to have to go home tonight without having to answer a question. So, Stephanie, traffic counts. This is a county road. Does the county have any different views on the traffic situation than, say, what our municipality has? Is it? I really think. I really hope the county takes the traffic situation into consideration, because this is going to be an effect. If we put 163 units there, the traffic's going to be a big problem. Can you enlighten us at all of how the? No, I want Stephanie to answer this.
I just, through you, Your Worship, I wasn't sure if we could make Stephanie do that at the end, like where we would, if there's additional questions for Stephanie, or if it's appropriate for her to answer right now.
So you're saying it may not be appropriate for her to.
I mean, I don't know the answer to that, but I was just thinking if anyone else is thinking they also had a question for like a county related question, we could get Stephanie to answer them at one time rather than having her get up and down a few times.
Yes.
Wasn't sure.
Okay.
I don't know if we can maybe just park it till the end of the council questions and then.
See, this is a hybrid, and this kind of meeting is a hybrid, and it really, when we are talking to the county planner, we're really talking a different level of, we're talking about the subdivision, not talking about the zoning. This is really a meeting about zoning. It's not, I don't think, a meeting about the subdivision, because that's the county's province. So I haven't helped anybody with that comment, but that's it. More member or councils. Sorry.
I just wanted to clarify, the county is sharing this meeting with us, although council's really most concerned about making a decision on the zoning. So definitely council will have to make a recommendation to Gray County when it comes time on this subdivision. Certainly the county's not just doing this as an isolation of the comments that council would make. So we would be bringing back a staff report in the future, looking for council support for our recommendation, whether that's to approve or not approve or whatever. But they probably will be broken up between zoning and the subdivision just based on the timelines. But Stephanie is here because this is a joint meeting.
Other questions from council? Councillor Forder?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, not a question, just a comment for clarification, because I already had 2 emails come to me. Just with the terminology that Meredith had used, there is no actual swim facility. It's stormwater management facility. Just some people didn't understand what that was. So there's no swimming pool as far as I know. Also, just to throw over to the developer is I'd just be curious to get a comment at some point in time how they would respond to the suggestions made by Grey Bruce Public Health regarding healthy environments and the climate change mitigation measures that can be used with their materials. Thank you.
Other questions from council? Councillor Yuri?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I guess, Denise, just a little clarification. Bob Sewell's comment about it being ag once upon a time, or the fact that it's been development. I'm also very curious, just kind of the genesis of that, kind of where that ever happened. Bob, I can tell you that Ross Machin owned that. He was a family friend of ours. So our orchard, their orchard, we talked many, many times. Big frustration of that, as Mr. Greenfield pointed out, is that small orchard, very hard to compete in a big world with a small orchard. He was getting older and retired and got out of it anyway, but he lamented, like every other small orchard around, how it was pretty tough to make a living on 15 acres of orchard. So it's pretty tough to even to do that, devil's advocacy and all that kind of stuff.
I just wondered, like the agriculture, was it agriculture? How did it develop?
Yeah.
Was it through the proper channel?
Yeah, I echo that question. I'm just curious because it does seem a little odd that it was that, but I'm sure there's some genesis that we're not aware of. So I'd be curious down the road to know what that answer is.
Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Mayor Kentner. Basically, I was looking for the same answers. When did it get turned to development? You're going to answer that. A big question is the project going to be raised 4 meters? I doubt it, but it's in there. That's a question I'd like. That would look like hell. And Bobby asked how we got here. Well, like Denise answered, when somebody brings a planning thing forward, by law, we have to do this. And you knew about this before I did. I just knew about this last week.
And I
So
clarify that my other big get here was with regards to the agriculture part, because if it wasn't passed properly, it should not be development right now. It should still be agriculture. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Do you have a response? I think I just let me quickly check. As council asked all their questions, if they have, I'm going to turn it back to Denise or Meredith as well for your response to anything that has come up here.
So, through you, Mr. Chair, I've got a couple answers, and I think Meredith might too on a couple of easy ones. I just was going to jump in on a couple things, and then the developer should have the ability to be able to. The agent can wrap things up as well. So the couple of the questions that I was going to answer today, just to let people know what we're doing. So one of the things I heard a lot about was water table and stormwater management and grading and things, including raising of the site. And one of the things I just wanted to just remind everyone is that this is right now a proposal, so we haven't reviewed all of the stormwater management. But what we are doing is that the concept, which is this is what we're at now, is the concept stage. Could this development happen on this site? So we're looking at the question of is the zoning appropriate, or is this the type of units that could be considered here? And the way that they're proposing to deal with stormwater, does that generally make sense? And if that got approved, so if council approved the zoning and the county approved the draft plan of subdivision, the developer would go back to their engineers and actually design a stormwater management system. And so one of the things I just wanted to point out is that what I've heard a lot is that, and this is not unusual, I hear this on a lot of properties, and it's really common in our area, that stormwater management and high water table issues exist, or drainage generally. It's really common in our area to be an issue. So what we wanted to just note is that when those are pre-existing issues, one of the only ways we can improve it is through a development with the stormwater management systems, but that will have to deal with water from this development in an appropriate way. We can't really change anything as it is now, because we're not going to be able to go on property by property and say, hey, you've got this or that person's got that. So people are kind of stuck with what they've got. And that isn't a really great position to be in. But when a development comes forward in the modern day, they have to deal with their own stormwater through a stormwater management plan, because they are going to displace some water, because it can soak into the ground now, but there'll be pavement and roofs and things like that and foundations that this will cause. So sometimes there's some existing drainage patterns that can be improved by a development, because they are doing a stormwater management system. And I'm not guaranteeing anything, and I'm not an engineer, but the engineers generally are the ones that are the experts in designing those systems. And so we would be reviewing that as time throughout the process. So right now we're looking at the concept, and just generally, does it look like it could be done? And then if it got approved, they would go back and start actually designing that stormwater management plan, that stormwater management pond, and the actual detailed grading and drainage that would have to happen. The other thing I just wanted to answer was about when, and Meredith and I already talked about this, so we were already prepared to kind of give an answer, but when did this become D? So the D is actually really irrelevant, because it doesn't give them any real rights. The rights are within the official plan. The official plan has designated these lands as an urban area, as an area for residential growth, and that is at 2 tiers, at the county and the Meaford level. So we don't have the answer of the year that this happened, but that is where the most significant change happened. At some point, the boundary was drawn around this area to say, this is now the settlement area where growth can happen. And Meaford incorporated that into our official plan. The county had it in their official plan. We will come back when we bring a staff report. So when Meredith writes her staff report, she will, because this question has come up so much, look back to see when those changes happened. And I can guarantee you that it happened above board, because it happened at 2 levels, and that settlement area boundary gets approved by the province. And it was probably many years ago, but just so you know, we will incorporate that into the staff report. Who pays for the sewer? The sewer extension is something that developers have to pay for initially, but often the users along that route would pay in when they connect. Any infrastructure that has to get upgraded will have to do so in order for this to happen. And we just want to remind everyone that this is, I don't want to scare Colin Travis, who's here, but this is probably a little ways out before this gets built. It's not going to be tomorrow, because there's a lot of steps that have to happen. And so it's not tomorrow that people would suddenly be expected to, you know, accept the changes that would happen as part of this type of subdivision development. It's going to be, there's still multiple steps that have to happen. If the zoning got changed, if the draft plan approval is approved, they still have to go into detailed design before they'd be able to actually start digging up things and putting in infrastructure. There's probably a few other things. I mean, perhaps like I'm going to let Mara speak to like the question about density and some other things. I think we can answer those today a little bit about why why do we have to have this or stuff like that, unless Meredith doesn't want to answer, which is fine. I'm throwing her under the bus right now, and you have to answer this question. There's some questions we heard like about fencing and things like that. I don't think we would have answers about that yet, but when we hear that people are concerned about things like privacy, trees and things like that, we would incorporate those into the way that we review it. So what are we thinking that people need or asking for? And is there a way to incorporate that into the approval if it's possible? And then that's something that we would consider in the future as part of the draft plan conditions. So just to go back to the basics here on that a little bit too, is when someone gets draft plan approval for a subdivision, what they're getting is the approval based on a bunch of things they're going to have to still do. And that may mean additional study work and a lot of the work still has to happen at that stage. So they get an approval that could expire in 3 years or whatever, based on get these conditions met. So it's not a final thing. So when someone gets a draft plan approval, there's still a number of steps, but that would be the type of decision that county council would be, or county would be making on this subdivision. The municipality would be making the decision about the zoning and whether those zoning types are appropriate. But I will let Meredith decide if she's got some things she wants to answer now, if she can, because obviously there's things we'll have to go back and look at to be able to find details, and anything we have that we've recorded, we'll be probably going back through the meeting as well and recording everything we can to include in a summary for council in the staff report.
Meredith?
Through you, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Sorry, I'm speeding through my words tonight. Yeah, I would just speak to the density question like Denise mentioned. So we had a conversation about this early on in the application process, myself and Stephanie and Colin. And so the proposal was found to meet the county OP density policies of 35 units per net hectare. And it also meets the Meaford official plan minimum density policies, which are overall 25 units per net hectare. And so we don't have any concerns in that regard. We don't have like a maximum density policy. It's really a minimum density, because like I mentioned earlier, we're looking for intensification in the urban living area and in the Meaford OP and the primary settlement area in the Grey County official plan. So that's kind of some of the basis for that minimum density requirement. One of the other questions I heard tonight was about trees. I thought I could answer that one. So when trees fall, what happens, and trees die, whose responsibility is it? So kind of does depend on the situation. But essentially, if a tree does come down, members of the public do have the ability to contact our bylaw department and to assist with removal of the tree. And we do also have like a tree management bylaw, as does Grey County. And so we do have information that's available on our website, where you can kind of determine, okay, what's the size of my property? Because that also does make a difference in terms of what is done. So I think the answer to that is case by case, but since that one came up, I can put it into the questions that we have, that questions document online, in case other people have that same question. And yes, I think the majority of the rest of the questions Denise has addressed. I'll leave some for the ones that Stephanie and Colin have kind of, I'm sure, identified at this point to provide an answer to.
Stephanie, were you prepared to answer, or do you have any answers that you could supply at this time? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I can briefly just touch on the transportation question. So yeah, as it relates to our review for traffic, the county would look at the classification of the road. And so in this case, it's more of an urbanized road. And so through that, there's different thresholds that they'd be looking at in terms of engineer standards, how much traffic can that road accommodate. And then it's predominantly done through a lens of safety. And so again, the bulk of the nature of inquiry and that we're looking for here from the public and the neighbors is, are there inherent safety concerns that are potentially going to be incurred or perceived as a result of this development? And so seeking consult and feedback from the public as is right now. So are there safety concerns with the road condition and how people navigate their community within proximity to this proposed development. And then we'd look at factoring in how this proposed development could potentially have an effect on enhancing the safety concerns, for example, and what sort of mitigation measures we need to look at. So it really comes down to engineering standards. But then again, what are the localized safety concerns observed, and how can we best address those through various mechanisms and measures? So that would be a helpful piece of information to share with the planning team as members that are neighbors that are close in proximity to this development.
I have a question for our clerk. Margaret, does the proponent have, it's not on my script, does the proponent have an opportunity to have a final word here?
Yes, I think that shouldn't be a problem. Thank you.
Sorry?
It shouldn't be a problem.
No, thank you. Go ahead, Colin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And there's been a lot of very interesting, very passionate discussion here tonight, and we don't take it lightly. As I said during my talk, we've made notes. We'll be listening to the tape as well, Denise, and we'll be making a list of the things that we need to address and answer. And if we can answer them, we will in that chart that I mentioned, listing the questions and issues. And if we can't answer them specifically within the next week or so, we will definitely indicate how we're going to answer those and address them. And that includes the hard stuff when it comes to engineering and traffic and drainage and that sort of thing, as well as the policy questions that the last speaker raised. So again, we look forward to these. And again, it's been a very interesting and a very useful meeting for us. And thank you for that, Mr. Mayor and members of council.
I'd just like to thank our staff. I honestly can tell you that I think we have had more answers to public questions in this meeting than I have seen in previous planning public meetings. And I greatly appreciate the support of staff in answering these questions. I say to you people, you should keep in touch with each other. You have done a really good job tonight on behalf of your neighborhood. And thank you for your input very much. I also would like to just add that it took a long time to read the Loon Call subdivision agreement. And boy, I'm telling you, their feet are to the fire. So I believe that when a subdivision agreement is developed, it will be very comprehensive. And, the community will be well protected from what I have seen in connection with that particular application. So thank you for attending this meeting and sharing your thoughts on the application. This matter will now be referred back to Development Services staff to follow up on any additional information required from the applicant based on the matters raised today. Once staff is satisfied that they have all necessary information needed to provide a recommendation on the applications, a detailed planning report will be brought back to council to assist us in our decision making. This report will evaluate how the proposal does or does not satisfy the provincial, county, and municipal policies that must be considered as part of council's decision. It will also explore the various public and agency comments received regarding the application, noting those tools which may be applied in order to address concerns raised and to mitigate potential impacts on nearby properties. If you would like to receive notice of a future decision on this file, please provide your contact information to the Planning Services Division by email at planning@meaford.ca. And with that, I'll declare tonight's meeting adjourned.